Internet baby.
That fine art is just a big scam used to launder money and avoid tax. What are the conspiracy theories that you know is true? I firmly believe that the global elites and the governments are actively making people more stupid with the passing of time. And it can be easily observed. Just compare cultural products from the recent past, 1970s and 1980s, like music, movies, and TV series. They were infinitely better. Sure, hairstyles and fashion ruined it at some measure, but they were still better. Even the crap we used to consume in the 1990s, knowing it was crap compared to stuff produced in the last decades, sounds like fine poetry compared to today's crap. Now let's go to a more distant past. Artists were able to produce things like this with very primitive tools and few materials available. The world is more stupid today than it was in the Paleolithic. Back then people had not yet discovered how to make computers, but they could start a fire, build a shelter for rain, make arrows. Now you find out that you have run out of coconut oil, and there is no Walmart anywhere nearby. Panic. 1 month later you are found dead from starvation at your apartment. The most convincing one I've read is regarding Brexit. The conspiracy is, in brief, that the entire Brexit idea, its political genesis, the campaigns, and the funding, all come from a small group of rich people who dislike the fact that the EU is in the midst of introducing financial reforms that block many financial loopholes and offshore schemes that allow the extremely rich to get away without paying taxes on much of their income. These rich people, who greatly enjoy the current system, wanted to leave the UK out of these reforms. They started the whole crazy Brexit story, they funded the campaigns, they came up with the blatantly stupid excuses, like blue passports, which the UK are free to have as members of the EU, are bendy bananas, ditto. They got politicians to froth and rage about EU bureaucrats, they pretended that this was about British sovereignty. It was all, like most things, just about money. This makes complete sense to me, because I cannot see how any rational person, who isn't rich enough to not give a shit about society at large, could actually think that Brexit will be good for the UK. But it also ticks all the boxes for a conspiracy theory. The FBI, CIA, and NSA, Supreme Court, and most of Congress are largely fascist white supremacists, and the only thing keeping this from going full tilt is that there's way more of us than them, and tech still can't cover the difference. Until we start letting them fly gun drones in US cities, then we're fucked 100%. Which we will, soon. The one I find valid is the theory that the attack on 9/11 was not carried out by 19 Arabs led by bin Laden, that it would have been impossible for that group alone to pull it off. First of all, there's not one Arab passenger listed on the manifest of one of the 4 fatal flights. Who hijacked that one? This huge fact is something the world seems to have overlooked or voluntarily buried. So, it's clear that not only Arabs were involved in this crime against humanity. 4 of the individuals named by the FBI as the perpetrators who died in the hijacked planes were still alive after the event. One was an airline pilot living in Egypt. America's defense system was totally dismantled on that day, to the point that not one of the 4 hijacked planes was ever approached by an intercepting military plane, even though they were all in the air for at least an hour. 1 squadron of F-16s on the search were ordered to leave the US and continue their search over the Atlantic. This is something which bin Laden and 19 Arabs, no matter how skilled, could not have arranged. Most scholarships are tax evasion scams. You always hear that there are so many small scholarships that go unclaimed every year, but I applied to over 100 of them, ranging from $500 to around $5,000 before going off to college, but didn't get a single one. Not one. I think they just have a scholarship fund as some kind of tax write-off, but never actually give it out to anyone, claiming no one applied or qualified. Robert Kardashian destroyed evidence that would have convicted Oj. He was handed a Louis Vuitton garment bag by Oj's assistant right as Oj returned from Chicago. None of the cops paid any attention to him as he walked away with the bag. When the bag theory was discovered a month later, Kardashian claimed to have lost it. This theory has been pretty well known for a long time. I remember them poking fun at it on an old episode of Roseanne. Yes, agreed. I remember a magazine speculating that the case contained the bloody clothing, and further speculated on if the contents were thrown in the trash, the police should search sector whatever at the dump, because that's where trash from Oj or Kardashian's neighborhood for the time period X could be found. Others think Oj dumped it when he was in Chicago, though. That Coca-Cola came out with new Coke, in order to change the original formula to corn syrup from real sugar without people complaining about the subtle difference. David Cully didn't kill himself. Now, for those who are too young to remember, shortly after 9/11, the US and the UK decided to invade Iraq. The rationale was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, even though the UN's chief weapons inspector wasn't convinced. A prominent UK weapons expert, one David Kelly, leaked to a journalist that he believed the report alleging WMDs was sexed up in order to give an excuse to go to war, and repeated his claims in front of a parliamentary committee. In so doing, he massively embarrassed the government because he was essentially accusing them of fabricating evidence to give them an excuse to go to a war they'd already decided to fight. 2 days later, Cully took a huge dose of coproximal and slit his wrist, severing his ulnar artery, on a walk in the woods near his home. Back in the 1970s, to decrease heart disease and obesity, the FDA recommended lowering fat content in food. Well, when they did this, the food tasted like garbage. The sugar industry suggested to add sugar to the food to compensate for the flavor. Thank your sugar lobbyist for that idea. Afterwards, heart disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes skyrocketed in the US. Still, for decades, fat was to blame. About 10+ years ago, evidence came out that sugar is actually worse for you than fat, because of the way your body metabolizes sugar. If your body gets too much sugar, it turns it to fat. It's easier to eat sugar than fat, and your body uses more energy to metabolize fat than sugar. This is why every year the Mediterranean diet is the #1 recommended diet. It suggests low sugar, healthy carbs, lean protein, and healthy fats from plants like olives, avocados, and nuts. Unsaturated fats, omega-3 fatty acids, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fat are good for you, like everything, in moderation. Avoid saturated and trans fat as much as you can, but eating a cheeseburger once a week is not going to kill your waistline. Forgot to mention, there are tons of articles about this issue and studies published online. I think it was 6 months ago the FDA quietly added a daily recommended sugar percentage to food labels. The world is controlled by the elite, and they plan on world domination. They use symbolism and propaganda everywhere, from logos to street signs. The Illuminati, Freemasons are all real, not to mention a few others. They control the media, the politics, banks, even what we buy, what we sell. They control all aspects of the modern world, and they are almost to the point to where they're going to make a big move towards one world government. But first, they want to take guns from Americans and remove cash from society. Sadly, this is all about to take place within the next generation, and the Antichrist will take his temporary throne and do his little skit, and then God will throw his ass in hell where he belongs, and we will live happily ever after. Don't take the mark. 3 of them I believe the most warning. If anyone has died from any of these events, I do not disrespect them. I sincerely apologize if it offends you or anybody else. The 9/11's conspiracy. First off, even Bush himself almost said conspiracy on TV himself when this happened. That's a little weird. Then all the screens on all the channels recording it blacked out for 3 or so seconds for an unknown reason. The nose of the plane was attached. This shouldn't be the case. It's supposed to be detached. There was no body of the plane. People heard explosions before the planes even hit the buildings. A wing of the plane in many of the footage simply disappears, then reappears when they're staying in the same position the whole time. The plane goes through the building and breaches out another end. This again is not possible. Also, the nose was there. This is also not possible. Upon hitting it, should have immediately disintegrated the whole plane. And by far the most suspicious of all, the buildings fell downward, like how a demolition happens, not falling over like something hit it. Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, I've seen it and didn't think anything of it. But then another school shooting happens, and a girl recognized as dead in Sandy Hook appears alive in this shooting. Same face, same clothes, same everything. Her parents were also the same. Nothing was changed. This was just weird and suspicious. The government is actually after us. Why? Because look at everything, all the technology that's been developed just for identification. They can bend us to their will at any time. They can do anything whenever they want. Men in black and UFOs do exist, but the government is hiding it. Men in black are very strange looking men who have small heads, sunken in eyes, and very pale, almost white skin. It will silence or kills the person if they do not stop talking about secrets of a facility like Area 51. They have a black fedora with a black business suit on with a black suitcase. They have no hair. They're always men, nothing else. We all know that UFO means unidentified flying object, but the number of cases that have been recorded are very odd, and there's simply too much of them. What do you think? Are all of these cases real or fake? Or are some real and some not? Hitler most likely didn't commit suicide, and either escaped or met his end in some other way. 9/11 wasn't what we were told. Those buildings were most likely demolished. Oswald obviously didn't work alone. There were 2 shooters involved in the JFK assassination. The fact that most eco-friendly ads and campaigns are funded by several of the 100 companies that account for 77% of global warming. They make ads claiming that you, the individual, is responsible for global warming, X. The crying Indian ad, the catchphrase "you can make a difference," etc., when in reality the large companies are the ones who pollute on a massive scale, and they make us think we are responsible. Really think about it. When was the last time you saw an eco-friendly ad that didn't say it was your fault? Those advertisements purposely have the people in the ad play horribly at the game. So, when someone sees it, they get angry with how bad the person is playing, and will therefore want to play it themselves to subconsciously prove how awful the person in the advertisement is. I always feel that way when I see an ad like that. Ads that have people obviously playing horribly in them has never made me think that the people in that specific game are just bad and easy to beat, or that the game is hard and provides a fulfilling challenge. It has only ever just made me feel like I want to prove how awful they are. That fine art is just a big scam used to launder money and avoid tax. I'm gonna go with that. Michael Jackson was not a pedophile. He pissed off the wrong people by buying a big, juicy chunk of music publishing that included all Lennon McCartney music and a collection of radio hits from the birth of rock to the end of the 60s. Most notably, he betrayed McCartney, who A. advised him to get into music publishing in the first place, and B. had now been outbid for his own music twice. I assumed he pissed off someone at Sony by outbidding them. Also, the MJ pedo narrative was hammered by magazines and TV stations owned by Sony, and Leaving Neverland was made by Sony Pictures. After the first pedo accusations hurt MJ's pocketbook, he sold half of ATV, the music publisher he had bought, to Sony. After Leaving Neverland, a Sony Pictures production, was released, MJ's estate sold the remaining half of ATV to Sony, who then turned around and sold McCartney the rights to the Beatles albums. Perfect crime, really. They probably made enough off the pedo narrative over 25 years that they basically got ATV for free, then turned around and squeezed McCartney out of fuck knows how much. Unless he was in on it from the start. That Hitler actually escaped Germany during the Soviet invasion. There is some legitimate evidence to back this up. I can remember learning that Hitler had ordered one of his servants to burn the bodies of him and Ava. Hitler could have actually killed the servant and had posed as the servant burning the bodies. The Soviets took the skull and didn't send it to the US immediately. Once the Soviet Union fell and Russia was established, they sent a piece of the skull that was said to be Hitler's to the US, and the results came out negative for Hitler. The lost cosmonauts. I think it's absolutely possible that there were attempts by the CCCP to launch manned aircraft into space before Gagarin, and that some of the cosmonauts die. That makes Gagarin even braver, because no doubt he knew there were failed missions before. In the 2020 Honolulu mayoral race, Rick Blangiardi and Keith Amemiya advanced to the general election because of foreign intervention, much like what had happened in the 2016 US presidential election when Trump won. Whether if the election was investigated to make sure that there was no foreign intervention is unknown, but if the Hawaii government did, they're hiding it for the same or similar reasons that Trump downplayed with the COVID-19 pandemic. There were also no ads that had the same tone as the ones that had played during that presidential election, because the two campaigns were bribing TV stations, not to play it to make themselves look better than Trump and Clinton in 2016, when they were running for president. Note: these two candidates have a similar background like Trump's because they're business people who lack prior political experience. There hasn't been a single negative ad against Special Olympics because they're good at bribing TV stations worldwide to not air them, such as why not to join or calls for anyone who wants to file a lawsuit against them for reasons such as sexual assault, like the one seen for Boy Scouts. Those sitting at the top of US society, i.e., political bosses, think tanks, owners of media conglomerates, etc., intentionally seed distrust and fear between different factions, races, religions, regions, etc., of American society, so we forget our commonality, and can't see how hard we're all being fucked over by those at the top. As President Johnson put it, if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you. Related, companies whose products actively degrade human environmental health, i.e., soft drink companies, plastic manufacturers, oil companies, etc., have very actively and aggressively pushed the personal responsibility angle, so that we believe everything is up to us. Not to say that we shouldn't be responsible for our own actions, but they've perverted our sense of what their contributions, sacrifices, and initiatives should be, which could actually have a massive and genuine impact. but it also impacts their bottom line, so they sow misinformation. I once worked in a showroom selling induction hobs, and we were told that they could potentially interfere with pacemakers. This was years ago, and no specific temp range was mentioned, but perhaps they've since narrowed the may stop your heart beating zone down to 80 to 110 C. Just a thought. My mom worked on designing pacemakers as an engineer. Induction cooktops do interfere with pacemakers. This is because these pacemakers rely on very precise electrical measurements in order to pick up the brain's signal to the heart. When exposed to a changing magnetic field, the voltage on the probes picking up the signal get a voltage induced on them, throwing off the measurements. Patients get told this when they get the implant, and it's not like people will die instantly. The pacemaker will go back to a basic mode, which is not ideal, and thus shouldn't be held for a significant amount of time. The pacemaker might give an auditory warning which, according to my mom, sometimes freaks patients out when they hear beeping coming from their chest. My boss had an automatic defibrillator put in. At first, we were told he wasn't allowed to use any of our machines with an electric motor in them, but now it's only the welder and our CNC engraving machine.